All right, more good news. S&P sees worst weekly loss in 5 years. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, we were looking really closely to see whether or not we saw any kind of buying into the close here. But as you mentioned, definitely taking another leg down. So we're looking at the worst week for stocks since March of 2020, back smack.
The worst week in stocks since March of 2020. That's 5 years ago. Wow.
In the middle of COVID, in the beginning of COVID, and we've got the S&P losing something like $5.2 trillion worth of market value this week. So yeah, definitely one for a major risk off, really coming off of course, President Trump's tariffs.
Look, not a good thing ever to talk about comparisons with the height of the sell-off ahead of the COVID pandemic, but we are seeing the worst day on the S&P 500 since March 16th of 2020, when that index dropped close to 12%. But we've given up our gains on the S&P 500 for going back almost a year. It's right now trading at a level that was last seen back in May of 2024.
Yeah, and let's not forget, too, it's Friday, and who knows.
So we've wiped out all of our gains for a whole year since May, is what he's saying. That's pretty crazy.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average that you're looking at on your screen right now, closing out the day lower by 5.5%.
Wow, 5.5%.
A drop of 2,232 points, now settling at 38,313. The S&P 500 below 5,100, a drop of more than 300 points, or 6%. You add that to the 5% from yesterday, and you can just do the easy math yourself. The NASDAQ composite down 1,000 points, or about 6% as well. Wow. And the Russell 2000 down 83 points, or 4.4%.
Yeah, let's not forget, too, we saw credit fear gauges soaring, so a lot of nervousness in this market. We understand why. I look at the S&P 500, guys, almost every name is lower. 489 names losing ground, only 14 gainers. And again, S&P 500 ending the week down 9.1%, biggest decline since March of 2020.
And we should just point out the S&P, deeper into that correction territory. The NASDAQ 100, it is official. It is in a bear market, down more than 20%. From its all-time high.
So it should be no surprise then that when you look at the IMAB, it is a sea of red. Every single industry group in the S&P down at least 4.5%. If I were to look at it on a 24-group basis, there is one group that did buck the declines: consumer durables and apparel, and that's tied to Vietnam.
So there you go, guys. NASDAQ is at an official bear market, which is 20% off the high. S&P worst week last week since May of 2020, 5 years ago, whatever it was. So things are getting kind of rough.
Of course, because if Vietnam actually drops the tariffs against the U.S. and Trump, of course, ameliorates the situation with Vietnam, that could be good news or less bad news for companies that rely on manufacturing in that country.
So many stocks in the red today. I just had to go with indexes. The KBW Bank Index follows banks, of course, down 6.6% today. In fact, banks had their biggest two-day drop going back to March of 2020. This after China escalated its trade war with the U.S. Capital One fell 8.2%, as did Bank of New York Mellon. J.P. Morgan Chase fell more than 8%. State Street down 8%. Goldman Sachs down 7.9%. Citigroup down 7.8%. Jason Goldberg over at Barclays reminded everyone that even though banks don't have direct exposure at the same level that other industries do to a global trade war, they have exposure to the industries that are affected by this. Of course, concerns about the economy, interest rate levels as well, also weighing on banks. Yeah.
Well, we should point out, too, though, there is some direct exposure there when it comes to capital markets activity,
Yes.
Tim. You saw the IPOs that were put on pause today. Klarna, Mountain, Chime, StubHub, eToro, just to name a few. Not a single sale in the corporate debt markets today or yesterday.
Yeah, no one wants to do an IPO in these type of conditions because no retail investors like me and you want to buy those IPOs, right?
And then you top that off and you talk about just the general deal-making activity. There were several M&A deals that were also put on ice for right now.
Yeah, the tightening of financial conditions that we've seen just in such a short period of time has been pretty remarkable. Also, keep an eye on U.S. stocks or Chinese stocks that are traded here in the U.S. with the NASDAQ Golden Dragon Index down close to 9% today. Wow. This after Beijing retaliated against the tariffs with an extra 34% levy on all imports from.
Well, what do we think? We're going to put tariffs on people on different countries and they're not going to do anything. They're just going to say, oh, okay. Of course they're going to retaliate. Come on.
In the U.S., shares of the Golden Dragon Index falling by close to 9% today. Still, analysts said that retaliation came sooner and stronger than expected, and it raises concerns about an escalating trade war, even at this point.
All right, let's go to the
Yeah, we don't want anything escalating, and we didn't even want it to get started, but yet here we are.
But we talk about record inflows this week into gold ETFs. Significant inflows, at least on a relative basis, almost record level inflows into European ETFs relative to U.S. ETFs here, and actually a lot of inflows into EM, and of course a lot of outflows in the U.S. And that great note out by Michael Hartnett.
Yeah, if you haven't seen my video on the best way to buy gold, check it out in the YouTube channel.
This morning, in his words, actually telling people that maybe you short things right now as we enter a new secular bear market. Remember, in his view, it wasn't just about tariffs. It was also about the impact of Doge and, of course, about the impact of DeepSeek back in January.
Yeah, to that point, just looking at flows, one-day flows, so this would be for yesterday, the Qs and Bill, which tracks short-term treasuries, saw the most inflows, but the volumes at which they saw inflows was minimal compared to about $4.5 billion coming out of SPY, which is the trader vehicle for the S&P 500.
You know, two things top of mind. We talked with our Gina Martin Adams. My concern is if the U.S., if this trade war stays around for a long time and it becomes a recession here in the United States, what happens in the U.S., it could ultimately, we're going to impact the whole world, right? If we see a global trade war, it's not going to be good for the global economy. It's something we talked about with Gina Martin Adams. The other thing is everybody says the caveat, what if President Trump changes his mind next week, in a month, or what have you? How long these tariffs last really determine what happens.
Do you think Trump will change his mind? Leave a comment below.
From here.
Well, walking it forward, though, too, have we seen capitulation, guys? When we talk about how many decliners are there versus advancing stocks within the S&P, and then that pickup in cross-asset volatility and the pickup in the VIX, are we finally clearing some positioning out, which would stabilize the equity market?
I don't know. I mean, we spoke to some folks earlier in the session today, early in our program, who said 4450 is what he expects on the S&P 500. So he sees further room to move lower.
Yeah, and I did a video on that. If that's not available yet, I'll leave a link in the description below. All right, guys, there you go. Worst loss in 5 years. Let me know what you guys think. Are you panic selling? Hopefully you're not. If you're a day trader or you trade in and out, maybe you are. But $5 trillion in one day, whatever it was, that's crazy. Us long-term investors, we keep dollar cost investing. Do you think, now here's the question of the day, and leave me the comments. Do you think this is a buying opportunity, or you think this is going down even further? Or are you just dollar cost averaging? Are you raising cash? What is your strategy? Leave me a comment below. And thanks a lot for watching this. Share this with someone who's interested in the market. And let's have a good discussion in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. And make sure you check out one of these videos here. And I will see you there. Peace.